Well, that was a sudden cutoff. So
We're back. Hello.
yes,
Hi.
and it's quite weird to see Mark while I'm talking. Welcome back. Thank you for sticking with us. So next up is Jonathan Mills. He's a technology advisor, but you might also know him because he's a Pluralsight author. He's a technology advisor, business leader. You might have seen him at some... Sorry?
Organizes conferences.
Organizes conferences, yes.
Yep.
Yeah, you're all over the place. So I'm pretty
Used
sure.
to be all over the place. I've been sitting
Oh,
in my
yeah.
basement for the last several months.
Yes. Well, I feel you. I feel you.
Yeah.
So you're going to do a talk on herding the enterprise data with Azure DataFactory. Can you share a little bit what your session will be about?
Oh no, absolutely. So we'll talk about this a little bit kind of in the intro, but the idea is that businesses have data. Like all the businesses I've ever worked with have tons of data, and they always want to like do something with it. But it's so distributed. Like they've got a whole bunch of different systems, and just trying to get that all pulled together in a meaningful way is something that historically has been fairly difficult for them to do. And so we've had several clients at the company I'm at now where we've kind of tackled the same thing, and we've done it with Azure DataFactory, and it makes it super easy. So I'm just going to kind of walk through what DataFactory is and how you implement it to kind of pull all your data sources together.
Awesome. So, well, we're looking forward to this. So, good luck on your session, and take it away.
Okay, excellent. All right. So like I just said, we have every company I've worked at for the last many years has had this concept of data from multiple different systems, but they want to use that data to do something meaningful. And so I've kind of put together this talk, Wrangling Data, just the idea of how to pull it all together and make it work. But when so I'm in the middle of America, so Kansas City, Missouri, where cows are normal, and so you see when you wrangle cows, they kind of line up and they just kind of go all the same way. I've been told in Western Europe this may not translate, so I'll kind of explain it. But typically when I think of wrangling data or applications, I think more like herding cats. And if you're not familiar with the term, just think about if you have 2 people on horseback and 50 cats instead of cows in the fields. That's a little bit more difficult to wrap your hands around and get things moving. And sometimes that's how data feels. Right, you'll get it set, and then something will go this way, or one system will update, and it's just it becomes very difficult to manage. And so that's kind of the idea that we'll talk through as we go here. So every company I walk into wants to make smart data-driven decisions. They've got the data. They've got data that tells them they should be doing this thing, but they don't know how to get there and how to do it. And so actually the company I work for right now, so I work for Worldwide Technology based out of St. Louis, Missouri, but we've got offices all over the place. And we've had several customers now where they've hired us on to say, hey, I want to make smart decisions. And whether it's them or other companies I've worked at, I'll pose the question. All right, great. Where's your data? Right. So let's get this working. Let's get going. Where is your data? And they'll start by saying, okay, I want to do some accounting type reports. I want to understand where my money's going and how I'm spending it. I've got an on-prem accounting system, SQL Server. Great. SSRS, some sort of reporting. That's easy. We can make that happen. And then they say, wait, but I've got an on-prem inventory system as well. And I want to tie those two together so I can keep track of what's going on and how things are flowing. It's like, oh, okay, that's fine. We can do that. But I've got a SaaS CRM system. So for some sales, and that's SaaS. That's not on-prem. That's somewhere else. So, but I want to pull that data in as well. And then I've got a human resources system that we want to keep track of. That's also SaaS. And then I've got a time management system, and they kind of lay all this data out, and it's spread everywhere. And the idea is what we want to be able to do is build something meaningful, build meaningful reports or meaningful information out of all these pieces that are literally spread all over the world. Because SaaS solutions, I don't know where that stuff is. It's in the cloud somewhere, right? And so what I want to do is I want to build a solution that's going to allow me to pull all that data together and do something meaningful with it. Now, what I'm going to kind of talk about as we go through this talk is how to make your data usable. And there's 3 steps that I'm going to talk about as we kind of go through this. So the first one is we're going to extract your data from all these disparate sources. Let's pull the data into a single place that we can then start to do something from with it. Then I want to transform that data. I want to merge the data. I want to enrich the data in some way. I want to do something meaningful with it from there. And then once I've done that, I want to load that data into a central repository. Now, this is a phrase that you may have heard 100 times over many, many years. This isn't a new concept, right? ETL, extract, transform, load. This is something that we've been doing forever and ever and ever. And I kind of want to call that out directly because it's not magic. It's not some weird new thing. It's just an easier way to do this thing that we've been trying to do forever and ever. And so typically I'll hit people with a slide, a flavor of this. So right now what we have is we have SaaS systems that are up in the cloud, and we've got on-prem systems. I've got accounting systems, I've got inventory systems, I've got, and then up in the cloud. And what I want to do, the first step in this ETL process, is I want to pull all this data out of those systems and stick it up in the cloud. Because once it's there, once it's in one place, I can kind of get my hands around it and I can do something with it. But until it's there, I can't really do anything. And so we're going to talk about a tool called Azure DataFactory. And what Azure DataFactory's primary job is to do kind of this thought of manipulating data and migrating data across ecosystems and making it work in an easier way. And so what we're going to do is, as we kind of talk about this, is we're going to pull data into the cloud using Azure DataFactory into something called an Azure DataLake. And I'm not going to go deep into DataLake for the purposes of this conversation. And you can yell at me later if you take issue with what I'm about to say. That's fine. Think about it as it's a storage. It's just a container. It's blob storage. It's kind of enriched a little bit, but for the sake of this conversation, we're just going to pull data from all these systems and we're going to drop it into what I call a raw zone. And this is kind of a concept that you'll see over and over again is we are going to pull the data in its raw form, exactly as it exists today, up into a data lake in the cloud that's going to mirror precisely that old system, but now just in one place. And so that's the first part that we're going to do. Now, that's difficult to demo, right? Like I can't build big, massive enterprise systems and wire them all together first. So I've got something a little bit contrived that I'm going to show you that actually we talked about in the intro. I run conferences. That's part of what I do, and it's where my passion is. And so I've got a demo kind of set up that's going to walk through that process. And so also remind me if you're in chat. I can't see it right now, but I'll see it later. I need to start my debug instance, and I'll talk to you about why when I get there. All right, so let's talk a little bit about this concept of what I have. So right now, what I have is a website called Sessionize, and what Sessionize is a conference organizer's website. You can create an event and people will submit talks to that event, and it has an API that lets me go and pull data. And so right now in this Sessionize API, this is what the conference I run, this is what we use. And actually this conference that I'm speaking at right now, the Sessionize, if I go to sessions, I've got 10 sessions that have been accepted for my conference. And that's great. All the data around these sessions is sitting right here in this website, and they have an API that I can use to go and pull this data, and that's awesome. But when a speaker gets accepted at our conference, we also ask them to fill out a Google document that gives us a phone number, a shirt size, and what their hotel needs, check-in, check-out date, that kind of stuff. And so now I've got speaker data in two separate places, right? I've got it in the API, and then I also have it in this Excel file. And I want to kind of merge that together. So this is the contrived example. That's not really contrived. We actually do this for think about the bigger thing. Okay, so let's look at DataFactory and how we would kind of tackle this idea with DataFactory. All right. So first and foremost, so this is the Azure portal, which over the course of this day, if you've been watching talks, you may have seen this once or twice. I have two items, and only two items, that exist inside my resource group for this talk. I've got a DataFactory and I've got a storage account, and that's it. That's all we've got. So if I go into my Wrangling DataFactory instance, you kind of get to this spot. And this is just the monitoring. You actually then click on this author and monitor, and that will take you out to adf.azure.com, which is where you're going to do all of your work on pulling data in. And everything exists right in here. And I'll kind of walk you through what that looks like. Okay, so data flow debug. I'm going to turn that back off because it's going to time out if I don't. And then I'm going to turn it on like I said I would. Now, data flow, we're not to yet, we'll talk about it in a second, is the piece that does data transformations. It's built on top of Spark, on top of Databricks and all that, so you get data flow. The reason why I say you have to start it, remind me, is because it takes about 10 minutes to kick off. And so if I wait till I get to the part where we're talking about data flow and then I click the button, then we sit and stare at nothing for 10 minutes while I wait for it to start. Okay. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to ingest the REST API and the Excel file into our blob storage, that storage account that we have, so that then we can do some interesting work with it. And everything happens through a pipeline. So the whole point of DataFactory is we're going to set up a whole bunch of pipelines to get things done. So let's create a new pipeline. And this pipeline is going to load the Sessionize speakers. Now you'll see, I'm going to take the time to actually give everything a name, and you'll see why kind of as we go. Now, all a pipeline is a series of events. It's a series of things that we do over time. And for this one, we're only going to copy data. So move and transform and copy data. We can do Azure Functions. We can do a whole bunch of general stuff like, we can set variables. We can do web lookups. We can do store procedures. We can do kind of all kinds of stuff. I'm not going to do any of that right now. Right now, we're just going to copy some data. Make this super easy. And when I do this in production for enterprise customers, we set up a copy data that just ingests that data. So we're copying Sessionize data. Right? Speakers. Okay. So a copy data has two pieces to it. You have source data, and then you have the sink, which is where you're going to set the data down. And so our source, I'm going to shrink this up. Our source is a data set, which we don't have yet. So we're going to create a new data set. And this gives you an idea of all the types of things that DataFactory can kind of wire up to. There's a whole ton of stuff here. The one we're going to talk about right now is a REST data source. So it will just wire directly up to REST. So we're going to open that because it's called REST 1, and I hate that. This is going to be Sessionize speakers. And so this data set is actually what's going to hold that speaker information. And so we also need what's called a linked service, because Sessionize, if I go back over here and kind of show you, this is the documentation for their API. And I have all the data. I've got smart grid data, session data, and speaker data. So I'm going to show that. And this is what it looks like. I've got an ID, first name, last name, all that kind of stuff. And so there's this URL right here. But notice every API, all of the endpoints, all have this same starting point. So I'm going to copy that. We're going to come back over here, and we're going to create a new linked service called Sessionize. And we're going to set the base URL as that endpoint. So, oh, it did time out, finally. Okay, so I'm going to set it to anonymous because we don't have any authentication, and I'm going to create. Now I'm going to click that again. And then our relative URL, so Sessionize goes to this base URL, our relative URL for the speakers. And that's it. So now let's go back over here and say, hey, Sessionize speakers, I can actually preview data. And this is going to show me, hey, I have the data. It was literally just that easy. It's almost like magic. So I now have, in what, 2 minutes, a DataFactory piece that is reaching out to a Sessionize API, a third-party REST API, and pulling data back, just like that. It's so easy and fast that you kind of just get used to it. The first time I did it, I was like, wow, that's really awesome. Now, a couple other things you can do here. You can actually set headers. So we have not everything's anonymous, right? So I have APIs that I have to call that have auth tokens so I can set additional headers here, and it also handles pagination sometimes. If it's specific, it'll handle some pagination for you as well. Okay, so I have data. Now we want to set that data down. So we're going to create a new data set, and we're going to go to Azure DataLake storage. We're going to set this speaker data down as a JSON document, just like that. And this is going to be Sessionize raw speakers. And it's going to our data lake storage. And so what I actually want to set it down in a raw Sessionize speakers.json. Now I'm not going to set up a schema for this just yet. And I'll talk about schemas for the data sets here in just a minute, but I'm going to click OK. And then check this out. So right now, this is Azure Data Explorer, Storage Explorer, Data Explorer, something different. And so in my Wrangling ADLS, that's my storage account, I have a raw blob container that right now doesn't have any folders in it. It's got these 2 leftover things in here, but it doesn't have any folders in it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click debug, and it's going to run this and actually go and pull down that speaker information from Sessionize, and it's going to drop it in this storage account, just like that. So I'm going to refresh this. And you now see I've got a folder called Sessionize, and there's my speakers.json file. So just like that, I've gone and I've pulled data down. Now, real quick, we're going to add another pipeline, because there's 2 pieces of information I need, right? So this is going to be load the survey, copy data. So you'll kind of get in a groove here. So this is going to be copy survey. Now remember the last one, I was copying from a REST API. This time I'm copying from an Excel document. Remember, my Excel document just kind of looks like this. It's email addresses, names, phone numbers, all of that kind of stuff for all of my speakers. And so what I'm going to do is I'll create a new data set. And this data set is just blob storage. And it's going to be a Excel file. And it's survey. Source. And it's coming directly from my blob storage account. And it's actually sitting in a directory called file system speakers. And then it's this demo speakers.xlsx. Now it'll only pull in 1 sheet at a time. And I know that this is now connected because now I can pick a sheet name and say, hey, it's the data sheet. And I'm going to import my, first row was the header. If you go back and look, This first row is my header information, and then all the data is below it. And I'm going to click OK. There we go. And I can preview my data. And there it is. I'm pulling that Excel file in just like that. So it doesn't matter whether it's a REST endpoint, it's an Excel endpoint, it's a SQL Server endpoint, it's any of that stuff. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to pull all that data right back in just like that. Okay. Now I want to drop this data somewhere. We're going to create a new sync data set back to Data Lake Storage 2. I'm going to drop it as delimited text. And this is going to be survey raw to ADLS. We're going to set the first row as the header, and it's going to go to my raw zone. Sessionize survey.csv. And now I'm not going to import my schema because I don't have a place to import it from yet. We'll talk, like I said, we'll talk about that in a minute. All right, I'm going to run that. And you'll notice just now my data flow debug is turned on. So it took about that long in order for that to start. Okay, now this is running. Let's go back over to my Storage Explorer. And you'll see, if I refresh, there it goes. And I refresh. Where did I drop it to? I dropped it into Sessionize. I didn't want to do that, but that's fine. So in Sessionize now, I also have a survey.csv. Ideally, I got to talking and I typed the wrong thing. I would have set that in a separate directory just to denote that it was in a different place. But we'll leave it there for right now. It's fine. It's not going to hurt anything. Okay. So now I've got data. Data is loaded. Awesome. Now I want to start to do something with it. Okay, so let's go back to slides, and I'll kind of talk through what that looks like. I did start my debug instance. We talked about that. Excellent. Okay, now that's awesome, right? So the cloud is reaching out to blob storage or reaching out to a REST API and pulling data in. And that's great right up until I want to get SQL Server data or ODBC data or even file system data that's on-prem behind my firewall. That's a whole separate ordeal, right? So these arrows right here that come from on-prem, it's not quite that easy. What Azure has done is they've given us something called an integration runtime. And what that is it's a piece of software that's going to sit behind your firewall on a VM somewhere, and that will have access to all of these systems behind the firewall. And DataFactory will actually wire up to that directly, and that's how it'll get. And I'll actually show you that real quick, just for the fun of it. If we come over into the tooling, it's two things I want to note while we're in the tooling, right? I've got my Git configuration, which is where I can set up Git or Azure DevOps for handling all of this stuff, right? You set up source control for anything that you're doing, please. But also I can do integration runtimes. And so what you do basically is you come in here to integration runtime, you set up a self-hosted one, self-hosted, and I'm going to create this runtime. Then I'm going to download and install integration runtime, and then I've got two keys. And so that's how that'll just wire up. And then when I go and I set my source data, those data sets I was doing, I would just pick that integration runtime, and it just handles it magically behind the scenes. You don't have to deal with it, which is just phenomenal and awesome. Okay, so now I'm here, and I've extracted the data from my sources, and that's great. but I also want to transform the data, right? I want to enrich the data in some way. I want to run a whole bunch of calculations because normally in an enterprise world, so normally when I'm doing this and I'm dealing with loading data or transforming data, it's tens of millions, hundreds of millions of rows, right? And so I don't want Power BI or some sort of reporting system doing calculations against hundreds of millions of rows. I want all of those calculations to be done already before it hits my data warehouse so that the reporting system can just pull that data out and not have to worry about it. And so that's the next step in this process, which is to transform the data into something that's kind of meaningful. And so what we want to do in our data lake is now we're going to go to our raw data zone and we're going to pick up this raw data. So for us, I have two sets of data. I've got speaker data out of the website called Sessionize, and I did see a question in the chat about what is Sessionize. All Sessionize is just it's an application to manage a conference, and so I've got all of the speaker and session information around a test conference that I created sitting in Sessionize, and now I've pulled that API, and it's sitting right here in my raw zone right here. I also have speaker survey data that says how many hotel nights they need and what their email address and shirt size and all that stuff is. And that's in a CSV file up here. And so what I want to do now is actually transform that data into a single thing, one set of data that has all of that information in it, and drop it back into a zone in my data lake that I call a curated zone. And that curated zone is going to match my end result database. The raw zone matches my source data. The curated zone is going to match my end result database, where that's going to end up. Okay, so here we go. I'll demo that and I'll kind of walk through a little bit of how that process works. And I did start the debug instance, and you saw how long it took, so it's a good thing we did that. All right, let's go back here. Now this is where I have to introduce a new concept to you. So far we've talked about pipelines, and all pipelines are controlling the list of things or the sequence of events that happen when I manipulate or when I'm moving data. That's kind of the whole purpose of a pipeline, is to facilitate moving data. Now we're going to talk about a data flow. And what a data flow is something that specializes in that data transformation piece. It sits on top of Apache Spark, and then there's layers in between, but it's this really nice GUI interface that lets me manipulate and enrich data in one spot. And so we're going to come over here and we're going to set up a new data flow. And we're going to do a mapping data flow. Even though I know this is wrangling, I'm not going to do a wrangling data flow. But basically what we're going to do is you add your source data, and then we do stuff to it, and then we drop it back out to a curated zone. And so let's start with our source data. So this is going to be our sessionized data. So here, note, this is why we name things nicely. Look at over here how nice everything's named. So I've got our raw speaker data that's sitting in the data lake. I've got the raw survey data that's sitting in the data lake. And then I've got sessionized speakers, which is the source speaker data, and survey source, which is the source survey data. So I'm going to take my raw speaker data, and I want you to notice something. I have 0 columns. It's not pulling in any information around what that is. And actually, let's add our other source, our survey data. Also, 0 columns. Survey. And the reason why it does this, and I call this out very specifically because this will happen to you, is you'll go in here and you'll try and do something and be like, why isn't it pulling anything? Well, that's because we didn't import the schema for these things. So if I go back to my survey raw and I look at my schema, notice there's no schema for these things. I want to import my schema from the connection. You can do it from a sample file, and that's how you would have to do it when we first created it, because when I first created it, remember it was when I was pulling data into the raw zone. The data wasn't in the raw zone yet, so I couldn't create it from the connection because it didn't exist. So now I can, And I can pull this data in. Now I have a whole bunch of data. And then I can go into my Sessionize raw speakers and do the same process. And now I have data. Notice first name, last name, full name, sessions, links, all of that stuff is right there. So if I go back to my data flow, now this did this to me before. I'm going to delete that and I'm going to re-add that source, my Sessionize raw speakers. Now you'll see I got 12 rows and I've got 12 rows. Okay. Now what I want to do is merge these two things together. And so what Dataflow does is it has a suite of tools that allow us to do all kinds of things to our data and make it nice. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to merge these two things together. And there's a couple different ways we can do this. I can do a join. I can do an inner join, a full outer, left, right, cross, all of that kind of stuff. And that's one way to visualize what's going on. I can also do something slightly different, which is I'm going to do a lookup. And what a lookup is basically for every item in my Sessionize data, I'm just going to go look in the survey data and see if it's there and pull that data in. So my primary stream is Sessionize, and my lookup stream is going to be my survey data. I'm going to finish that. Now it looks kind of weird because survey ended up here when I deleted Sessionize, but just kind of go with it. It's fine. Now look, the join has 24 total columns because it's got the 12 columns from survey and the 12 columns from Sessionize. And now I have to tell it how I'm going to join them. And I'm going to join on full name. And just trust me on this one because that's not phone number. Because that's the only thing that actually works and matches these up. You might want to find an ID or something if you can in your data and do it that way. But we work with what we have, right? So now I've got these two things. And what I can do is I can come over here to my data preview and I can hit refresh. And I can say, look, when it's done, this is another interesting thing. You might say, hey, I've got like 10 rows of data and it's taking forever to do the fetch. It takes, ironically, and I can just talk about this freely because I don't work for them, but like it takes the same amount of time whether I have 10 rows of data or 10 million rows of data. Like when I do this during my day job, I'll set my debug settings to 10 million rows of data. It takes the same amount of time. Okay, so now we see Aiden test. So this is one speaker. This is all of his Sessionize data, and he is joined with, this is the survey data. Aiden test, the phone number, and his check-in, check-out days. He's checking in on the 17th. He's checking out on the 19th. So just like that, I have wired these two things together from two fundamentally different data, two different sources, two different data types. One was an Excel document, one was a REST data source, and now I have them merged together in a single row to do stuff with. Now, for me personally, the conference I run, we will pay for a certain number of nights. We don't pay for all of your hotel nights. If you're coming in for a long time, we'll only pay for a certain number of nights. And so a piece of information that's interesting to me is the number of nights that a speaker is staying. And so what I want to do is I'm going to add to this lookup a derived column. And what this derived column is going to be is so hotel nights. I want to calculate the number of nights that they're going to stay so that I know whether or not they're going to have to pay for some of the nights. I can just tell the hotel ahead of time, right? So I'm going to add a column called hotel nights. And then I can enter an expression, all kinds of functions. I can add, I can delete, I can do current times, I can do timestamps, I can just whatever you want to do. There's a function in here that does it. And so actually all I'm going to do is I'm going to run a minus. And I'm going to convert on the fly to date My input schema went away. That's not awesome. I am going to, there's my input schema, just like that. Take my checkout date and subtract it from my check-in date. And so the way that works is I'm going to just minus to date, my checkout date, and then minus to date, my check-in date. So I'm just going to subtract my checkout date from my check-in date. That should work, right? Seems obvious, maybe. So we're going to save and finish that. And then now notice I have 25 total columns. Here I had 24. Now I'm deriving a new one called hotel nights. I'm going to hit refresh. And what you'll see when we get there is now I'm going to have some are 3 nights, some are 5 nights. If you're checking in on the 17th to the 19th, it's 3 nights. And so that'll go. And so as that's going, I'm going to go ahead and add the last piece, which is our sync. Oh, no, there it goes. Okay, hold on. If you look at the end, all the way to the end, now I have a hotel nights. Some of them are 2. This one's 5 because they are... where is it? Checking in on the 16th, checking out on the 21st. So 5 nights, right? But there, now I've got too much data. So I'm going to click select. And what select does is let me get rid of some of it. So I don't need the first name and last name. I've got their full name. I don't really need their sessions, links, questions, categories, or their name because I've got their name twice. That looks like it should be about what I need. So I'm just going to delete those columns. Done. Now I'm down to 18 columns. And then we add a sync that's going to drop data. So now this collected data, I've done all of this stuff to it. Now I'm going to drop this data into a new data set. So I've got my data sets over here. I'm going to create a new one that is Azure DataLake storage, delimited. Nope. We'll drop it to a JSON file. Now this is going to be staging. Speaker staging. Back to ADLS, but this time we're going to drop it to our staged zone. Speakers. Now I can't input the schema yet, right? This is what I was talking about just a minute ago, because this data doesn't exist yet. Once it exists, then I can come back and I can import my schema. I'm going to set a setting just to output it as a single file. And be done. And so that gets us there. But the data flow doesn't actually do all the work, right? It does all the calculations, but it doesn't actually execute on its own. So the last piece we have to do is actually come up here and create a new pipeline called transform speaker. And we're going to execute a data flow. Create a new data flow. Oh, no, we don't want to create a new one. We're going to execute this first one. Data flow 1. See, I got lazy and I didn't name it something. This should be like transform speakers or something like that. And now when I run this, if I've done everything right, I should now end up with a curated session information in my staged data. It's not there yet, but it will be here in just a second. And I'll refresh. Refresh. There it is. There's my speakers that I didn't spell properly. And then I didn't save something. Okay, but I'm not going to worry about it. We're going to move on. So basically, it just spit out the data. If I go back to my data flow, I said we won't worry about it, but I'll kind of show you. I am outputting to a single file. Oh, there it goes. Okay, now it's done. Okay. So that's the transform piece. So we've gotten the load piece, the extract, the transform piece. Now let's kind of talk about the last piece of this. Okay. And the last piece would then be to load into a central repository, right? So I've pulled the data. Now I want to load it into a central repository. And so the way I usually talk about this in this context is I have my raw data zone. I transfer data into a curated data zone, and then we usually will do something along these lines. I'll use DataFactory. I'll just do another copy pipeline that loads into a Synapse data warehouse that I can plug in Power BI or some SSRS reports or something along those lines, to allow you now to pull real-time reports based upon this data. And so just like that, like 25 minutes, we can set up something that pulls data from multiple data sources, aggregates it all together, enriched it. We only did one little enrichment piece. If some of these that we work on, they're fairly massive and they pull a lot of stuff together and they can take several days to work on. But at its core, right, that's all they are. And you pull that together and then you drop it into a data warehouse. And now I have something I can build reports around. Okay. Let's set yourself up for success here. I'm going to talk about 3 things that are incredibly important that you want to do before you start digging through and doing this in real life. One is understand what your desired outcomes are. Right. So oftentimes, I'll talk to management somewhere and they'll say, we have all this data. I want to do something with it. Well, that's awesome. What do you want to do with it? Like, what are the desired outcomes before we just start throwing stuff against a wall, right? Well, are you trying to get better at sales? Are you trying to get better at inventory management? Are you trying to get better at people management? What's the desired outcome? Work through that process so you set yourself up for success and hey, I've hit it. What are the metrics that you're measuring yourself against so you know what you're trying to do when you get to the other side? Keep your data targeted. I cannot stress this enough. When you start loading data into DataFactory, into your DataLake, you want to make sure that data is targeted and understood as to what it's for. And so I like to use this image, right? So this is a lake. Think about this as your Azure Data Lake, right? It reflects directly the real life. We set up a data lake in our demo that reflected exactly the source data, and then it reflected exactly what we would then load into a data warehouse. It's a reflection. It's loaded, transformed, and so it's 2 sets of reflections, but it's well understood. And when you need to go and get some data out of that data lake, you know exactly where to go, and it's very clear and nice. If you don't do that, what you end up is a data swamp. And this happens all too often, right? Where you end up looking at a swamp of data that you don't know where anything is. You don't know what's usable. You don't know what's been transformed. You don't know what's the right thing. And you end up, it's just becoming mired and bogged down and not understanding the types of things that you want to do. Okay, so avoid the data swamp. Last one, keep it clean and documented. I want to stress this one a lot because when I was doing my demo, I was running through my demo last night and I got to the end and I was trying to pick the data source for my data factory. And over on the left side, it looked like this because I hadn't taken the time to name anything. I was like, well, which one of those things is my raw survey data? I don't know. I think it's delimited text 1 because it's the only delimited thing, but I can't really be sure. So I have to go through this process, right? I'll come back over here to what we did over here. Our data sets are very clean. Our pipelines are very clean. We know what everything is. And actually what I'd like to do even more is that create folders in here that says, hey, this is raw zone, my raw zone data sets. And then I'll actually move everything around and put things in folders to keep things organized and nice. Your pipelines, look at this. Your pipelines have descriptions. Talk about what they do. Document your system and make it so that it's easy to work with and easy to follow. One last thing, because this inevitably will happen to you the first time you use DataFactory if you haven't used it before. It's got kind of a weird way to save. I haven't saved anything, and if I close this tab right now, literally all my work goes away. And that's super frustrating. That happened the first time I used it. I spent 8 hours. I was playing around. It was awesome. I built all this cool stuff. I closed my tab. I came back the next morning and it was all gone. So don't do that. We want to publish, and that's what saves everything. Now, if you are using source control, like you should be, up here it'll say save, which will do a commit. And then when you merge to master, then you publish. So source control is the other piece. In other words, don't make your stuff look like this, because this is bad. All right. So that's kind of the idea. It's kind of just a super fast run through of how things work and what wrangling data looks like, and basically just give you an idea of how easy and how powerful DataFactory and Azure Data Flow are in order to get you where you need to be with disparate data systems. So thank you guys very much.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. This was a really excellent walkthrough of how to use DataFactory. I've used DataFactory before, but just to move data from A to B and also from on-premise to the cloud. But I've never actually didn't know that you can also just connect it to an API and read from that. I really like this use case. I'm definitely gonna give it a try myself. Thanks for highlighting that. It's really nice.
And that's the beauty of it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it makes it so easy to connect to just about anything that you want to do.
Exactly.
I didn't show all the connectors, but there's a ton of them out there.
Yeah, exactly. Indeed. Yeah, no, it's a brilliant product in India, and it's not too well known in India, but it's definitely need some more love from the whole community to highlight all the different things you can do there. I also appreciate it immensely that you want to name things properly, also in your flow and in your pipeline. I know we need a lot of people who don't really do that, and it gets really so messy if people don't do that. So also thanks for pointing that out.
Absolutely.
You did mention the integration runtime to copy from on-premise to the cloud. So what kind of use cases do you see happening there?
Okay, so for us, typically, if we're pulling data from someone's on-prem system, like SQL Server or like a mainframe system or even just file system, they don't want to expose their SQL Server to anyone outside the firewall, right? You want to keep that protected behind your firewall. And so the integration runtime, since it sits behind your firewall, acts as that gateway that allows them to stay secure, but yet you can still access it from the cloud.
Yeah, that's neat, very nice. Yeah. And then and the client that I'm working now, we're also using it as part of a cloud migration. Yeah. They have part of the system still on premise and part of the systems now on Azure, but they still need to talk to each other. So it's also like some kind of a glue system now to make sure that two systems can talk. So that's really nice. I like it.
Yep.
Cool. I have one question. What do you think of the CI/CD integration of DataFactory? Because there is some Git integration there, right?
There absolutely is Git integration. And okay, so the question is, what do I think of it? I'm going to be careful. So I am a JavaScript developer. I've been a developer for longer than I care to admit. I've been doing this stuff for a long time, and I love Git, and I love having Git on the command line and just Git merge and all of that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. When I do DataFactory, I don't do that? Like it's all in this GUI interface, and it's there now, and we use it. I've got the project I'm on right now. I've got another developer who's also doing some stuff, and we cut branches and we wire it back together and kind of run it through that process. It feels clunky to somebody who's used to Git command line.
Yeah, exactly.
But it absolutely works, and I would highly recommend that if you're doing anything with multiple people, especially because of the way saving works. You know, it's very easy to save on top of somebody's stuff. We've done that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, indeed. I think that there's room for improvement indeed, definitely there, and how to need collaboratively work on DataFactory. But indeed, I definitely do like the product myself.
Yep. No, it's there, and you should definitely use the source control if you can. Yep.
Cool. Thank you very much for your session. I find it really insightful. I think the attendees have to agree on this as well. So what can you recommend on further reading on this? Is it documentation? Is it good? Any other resources you can recommend?
Honestly, okay, so there's lots of resources. I would be remiss if I didn't say Pluralsight. I do not have a DataFactory course, so I'm not pushing my own stuff. Okay. But there's lots of Pluralsight stuff out there. Yeah. But honestly, if you just go out, if you've got an Azure subscription, go out and just create a DataFactory. There are a ton of resources on the home screen. The docs team at Microsoft is phenomenal. I know several of them personally, so I'm kind of making them feel good a little bit. But they do a great job with tutorials and all of that's wired right up into the home screen on DataFactory. Just go play with it.
That's an excellent tip. I definitely agree. Okay, thanks again for your time and sharing your knowledge. Enjoy your day. We'll have a short break now. And then our next speaker, we'll have a slight change of schedule because the next speaker has some technical difficulties connecting to the internet. So we'll have a slight speaker shuffle, but we'll be back shortly.
All right, thanks.
Cheers.